In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky, Chapter 2. G's childhood was passed on the frontier of Asia Minor in strange, very remote, almost biblical circumstances of life. Flocks of innumerable sheep, wandering from place to place, coming into contact with various strange people. His imagination was particularly struck by the Yazidis, the devil worshippers who, from his earliest youth, had attracted his attention by their incomprehensible customs and strange dependence on unknown laws. He told me, among other things, that when he was a child he had observed how Yazidi boys were unable to step out of a circle traced round them on the ground. He had passed his young years in an atmosphere of fairy tales, legends, and traditions. The miraculous around him was an actual fact. Predictions of the future which he heard, and which those around him fully believed, were fulfilled, and made him believe in many other things. All these things taken together had created in him at a very early age a leaning towards the mysterious, the incomprehensible, and the magical. He told me that when he was quite young he made several long trips to the East. What was true in these stories I could never decide exactly, but as he said, in the course of these journeys he again came across many phenomena telling him of the existence of a certain knowledge, of certain powers and possibilities exceeding the ordinary possibilities of man, and of people possessing clairvoyance and other miraculous powers. Gradually, he told me, his absences from home and his travels began to follow one definite aim. He went in search of knowledge, and the people who possessed this knowledge. And, as he said, after great difficulties, he found the sources of this knowledge in company with several other people who were, like him, also seeking the miraculous. In all these stories about himself, a great deal was contradictory and hardly credible. But I had already realized that no ordinary demands could be made of him, nor could any ordinary standards be applied to him. One could be sure of nothing in regard to him. He might say one thing today and something altogether different tomorrow, and yet somehow he would never be accused of contradictions. One had to understand and connect everything together. About schools and where he had found the knowledge he undoubtedly possessed, he spoke very little, and always superficially. He mentioned Tibetan monasteries, the Chitral, Mount Athos, Sufi schools in Persia, in Bukhara, and eastern Turkestan. He mentioned dervishes of various orders, but all of them in a very indefinite way. During one conversation with G in our group, which was beginning to become permanent, I asked, why, if ancient knowledge has been preserved, and if, speaking in general, there exists a knowledge distinct from our science and philosophy, or even surpassing it, is it so carefully concealed? Why is it not made common property? Why are the men who possess this knowledge unwilling to let it pass into the general circulation of life, for the sake of a better and more successful struggle against deceit, evil, and ignorance? This is, I think, a question which usually arises in people's minds on first acquaintance with the idea of esotericism. There are two answers to that, said G. In the first place, this knowledge is not concealed, and in the second place, it cannot, from its very nature, become common property. We will consider the second of these statements first. I will prove to you afterwards that knowledge, and he emphasized the word, is far more accessible to those capable of assimilating it than it is usually supposed, and the whole trouble is that people either do not want it or cannot receive it. But first of all, another thing must be understood, namely, that knowledge cannot belong to all, cannot even belong to many. Such is the law. You do not understand this because you do not understand that knowledge, like everything else in the world, is material. It is material, and this means that it possesses all the characteristics of materiality. One of the first characteristics of materiality is that matter is always limited. That is to say, the quantity of matter in a given place under given conditions is limited. Even the sand of the desert and the water of the sea is a definite and unchangeable quantity. So that if knowledge is material, then it means that there is a definite quantity of it in a given place at a given time. It may be said that in the course of a certain period of time, say a century, humanity has a definite amount of knowledge at its disposal. But we know, even from an ordinary observation of life, that the matter of knowledge possesses entirely different qualities according to whether it is taken in small or large quantities. Taken in a large quantity in a given place, that is, by one man, let us say, or by a small group of men, it produces very good results. Taken in a small quantity, that is, by every one of a large number of people, it gives no results at all, or it may even give a negative result, contrary to that expected. Thus, if a certain definite quantity of knowledge is distributed among millions of people, each individual will receive a little, and this small amount of knowledge will change nothing, either in his life or in his understanding of things. And however large the number of people who receive this small amount of knowledge, it will change nothing in their lives except perhaps to make them still more difficult. But if, on the contrary, large quantities of knowledge are concentrated in a small number of people, then this knowledge will give very great results. From this point of view, it's far more advantageous that knowledge should be preserved among a small number of people and not dispersed among the masses. If we take a certain quantity of gold and decide to gild a number of objects with it, we must know or calculate exactly what number of objects can be gilded from this quantity of gold. If we try to gild a greater number, they will be covered with gold unevenly in patches, and it will look worse than if they had no gold at all. In fact, we shall lose our gold. The distribution of knowledge is based upon exactly the same principle. If knowledge is given to all, nobody will get any. If it is preserved among a few, each will receive not only enough to keep, but to increase what he receives. At the first glance, this theory seems very unjust, since the position of those who are, so to speak, denied knowledge in order that others may receive a greater share appears to be very sad and undeservedly harder than it ought to be. Actually, however, this is not so at all, and in the distribution of knowledge there is not the slightest injustice. The fact that the enormous majority of people do not even want any knowledge whatever, they refuse their share of it, and they do not even take the ration allotted to them in the general distribution for the purposes of life. This is particularly evident in times of mass madness, such as wars, revolutions, and so on, when men suddenly seem to lose even the small amount of common sense they had, and turn into complete automatons, giving themselves over to wholesale destruction in vast numbers. In other words, even losing the instinct of self-preservation. Owing to this, enormous qualities of knowledge remain, so to speak, unclaimed, and can be distributed among those who realize its value. There is nothing unjust in this, because those who receive knowledge take nothing that belongs to others, deprive others of nothing. They take only what others have rejected as useless, and what would in any case be lost if they did not take it. The collecting of knowledge by some depends upon the rejection of knowledge by others. There are periods in the life of humanity which generally coincide with the beginning of the fall of cultures and civilizations, when the masses irretrievably lose their reason and begin to destroy everything that's been created by centuries and millenniums of culture. Such periods of mass madness often coinciding with geological cataclysms, climactic changes, and similar phenomena of a planetary nature, release a very great quantity of the matter of knowledge. This, in its turn, necessitates the work of collecting this matter of knowledge, which would otherwise be lost. Thus, the work of collecting scattered matter of knowledge frequently coincides with the beginning of the destruction and the fall of cultures and civilizations. This aspect of the question is clear. The crowd neither wants nor seeks knowledge, and the leaders of the crowd, in their own interests, try to strengthen its fear and dislike of everything new and unknown. The slavery in which man lives is based upon this fear. It is even difficult to imagine all the horror of this slavery. We do not understand what people are losing. But in order to understand the cause of this slavery, it is necessary to see how people live, what constitutes the aim of their existence, the object of their desires, passions, and aspirations, of what they think, of what they talk, what they serve, and what they worship. Consider what the cultured humanity of our time spends money on. Even leaving the war out, what commands the highest price? Where the biggest crowds are? If we think for a moment about these questions, it becomes clear that humanity, as it is now, with the interests it lives by, cannot expect to have anything different from what it has. But, as I have already said, it cannot be otherwise. Imagine that for the whole of mankind, 1/2 pound of knowledge is allotted a year. If this knowledge is distributed among everyone, each will receive so little that he will remain the fool he was. But thanks to the fact that very few want to have this knowledge, those who take it are able to get it, let us say, a grain each, and acquire the possibility of becoming more intelligent. All cannot become intelligent even if they wish, and even if they did become intelligent, it would not help matters. There exists a general equilibrium which cannot be upset. That is one aspect. The other, as I have already said, constitutes in the fact that no one is concealing anything. There is no mystery whatever, but the acquisition of transmission of true knowledge demands great labor and great effort, both of him who receives and of him who gives. And those who possess this knowledge are doing everything they can to transmit and communicate it to the greatest possible number of people, to facilitate people's approach to it and enable them to prepare themselves to receive the truth. But knowledge cannot be given by force to anyone. And, as I have already said, an unprejudiced survey of the average man's life, of what fills his day and of the things he's interested in, will at once show whether it is possible to accuse men who possess knowledge of concealing it, of not wishing to give it to people, or of not wishing to teach people what they know themselves. He who wants knowledge must himself make the initial efforts to find the source of knowledge and to approach it, taking advantage of the help and indications which are given to all, but which people, as a rule, do not want to see or recognize. Knowledge cannot come to people without effort on their own part. They understand this very well in connection with ordinary knowledge, but in the case of great knowledge, when they admit the possibility of its existence, they find it possible to expect something different. Everyone knows very well that if, for instance, a man wants to learn Chinese, it will take several years of intense work. Everyone knows that 5 years are needed to grasp the principles of medicine, and perhaps twice as many years for the study of painting or music. And yet, there are theories which affirm that knowledge can come to people without any effort on their part, and they can acquire it even in sleep. The very existence of such theories constitutes an additional explanation of why knowledge cannot come to people. At the same time, it's essential to understand that man's independent efforts to attain anything in this direction can also give no results. A man can only attain knowledge with the help of those who possess it. This must be understood from the beginning. One must learn from him who knows.